David Letterman's pen slipped from his finger and clattered onto the desk. Paul Shaffer stopped playing mid-note. The band went silent. 200 people in Studio 6A held their breath. Sitting across from Dave was Clint Eastwood, the man with no name, Dirty Harry, the toughest man in Hollywood. And right now, on this cold January night in 1985, the man who never showed emotion, who made a career out of stoic silence, was crying, real tears running down that weathered face. And what he was about to confess would destroy the myth of the invincible cowboy forever. This moment would shake everything America believed about masculinity. January 24th, 1985. Studio 6A at Rockefeller Center, New York City. Late Night with David Letterman was hitting peak cultural relevance. The wood-paneled studio glowed under tungsten light. The retro desk sat center stage. Paul Shaffer's keyboard gleamed. The Manhattan skyline sparkled through tall windows behind him. David Letterman, 37 years old, sat behind his desk shuffling blue index cards. His curly brown hair was perfectly imperfect. His tie hung loose. That gap-toothed grin was ready. But tonight, he was nervous. Really nervous. Tonight's guest didn't do talk show. Didn't do vulnerability. Didn't do anything except squint and shoot people on camera. Clint Eastwood. The booking had taken 18 months. Eastwood was 54 years old and at the absolute peak of his power. He'd survived the spaghetti western, the Dirty Harry franchise, and emerged as one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. But more than that, he'd become an icon, a symbol, the strong, silent American male, the man who spoke softly and carried a big gun, the man who never broke, never bent, never showed weakness. Eastwood's people had been clear. He'd do 30 minutes. No personal question. Talk about the new movie. Keep it light. Keep it professional. Clint doesn't do feeling. The monologue went perfect. Dave killed with jokes about the cold weather and Reagan's second inauguration. The audience loved. Paul's band was tight. Everything clicked. Then came the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Dave said, his voice carrying that mix of excitement and reverence. My next guest, one of the biggest movie stars in the world. He's been the man with no name, Dirty Harry Callahan, and about a dozen other characters who could kill you with a look. His new film opens next week. Please welcome Clint Eastwood. The audience erupted. Not the screaming hysteria of teen idol, the respectful applause of people meeting a monument. Paul's band played the theme from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The curtain pulled back, and Clint Eastwood walked out. He moved with that distinctive Eastwood grace, economical, purposeful, no wasted motion. He wore a simple gray suit, white shirt, dark tie. His face was all angles and shadows, weathered by sun and wind and 54 years of living. Those eyes pale blue, seeing everything, revealing nothing, swept the room. Dave stood to shake his hand. Eastwood's handshake was firm, brief, professional. He sat in the guest chair with perfect posture, legs crossed, hands folded, a man completely in control. Mr. Eastwood, thank you for being here, Dave said. Call me Clint. His voice was that famous near whistle, like gravel being poured slowly from a bucket. They talked about the new movie, about working with different directors, about the West. Eastwood answered in short, measured sentence, polite but guarded, professional but distant. This was going exactly as everyone expected, a pleasant but unremarkable interview with a man who didn't give anything away. Then Dave asked a simple question. Clint, you play these incredibly tough characters. Dirty Harry, the man with no name, all these guys who never show fear, never break down. Do you ever worry about being typecast? About people thinking that's who you really are? Something flickered across his face just for a sec, but Dave saw it. People think what they want to think, Eastwood said slowly. I'm just an actor. But these characters have become iconic. They've defined masculinity for a generation. Boys grow up wanting to be you, to be that tough, that strong, that unbreakable. Eastwood was quiet. The silence stretched. Paul glanced over from his keyboard, sensing something. Can I tell you something, Dave? Eastwood's voice was even quieter now. Of course, those characters, the cowboys, the cops, the tough guys, they're fantasies. They're not real. They're not me. The studio went quiet. This wasn't the script. This wasn't the Clint Eastwood people knew. What Clint Eastwood said next would shatter 40 years of Hollywood mythology. I spent my whole career playing men who don't cry, Eastwood said, his voice steady, but something underneath it trembled. Men who don't show fear. Men who solve everything with violence and never look back. He paused, his jaw tight. And I've been carrying something for 30 years. Something I've never told anyone. Not my wife. Not my kid. Not my therapist. Nobody. Dave leaned forward, the comedian completely gone. Just a man listening to another man. In 1955, I was 25 years old. Broke actor. Nobody knew my name. I was in a plane crash. The audience gasped. This wasn't in any biography, any interview, any public record. Small plane, flying from LA to Seattle for an audition. Engine failed over the ocean. We went down. 2 people on board, me and the pilot. We hit the water. water. The plane started sinking. I got out. The pilot did. Eastwood's hand, which had been perfectly still, began to tremble slightly. I tried to save him. I went back down, tried to pull him out, but I couldn't. The plane sank too fast, and I had to make a choice: keep trying and drown with, or swim for shore. His voice cracked, just barely, but it cracked. I swam 3 miles in freezing water, and I left him there. I left him to die so I could live. The studio was absolutely silent. Paul Schaefer's hands hovered over the keyboard, froze. When I got to shore, I didn't report it. I was terrified they'd blame, terrified my career would be over before it started. So I just left, hitchhiked back to LA, and I never told anyone. A woman in the front row started crying. They found the plane 2 weeks later. Pilot's name was Thomas McKinley, 31 years old. Had a wife, 2 kids, and the report said mechanical failure. No one's fault, but I've spent 30 years wondering if I could have saved. If I'd been stronger, braver, better, could I have pulled him out? Eastwood looked directly at Dave, and his eyes were wet. So when people tell me I'm their hero, when boys tell me they want to be like Dirty Harry, like the man with no name, I want to tell them the truth. I'm not tough. I'm not brave. I'm a coward who left a man to die because I was afraid. Dave's throat closed up. This was beyond television. This was a man's soul breaking. Oh, Clint, Dave said carefully, you were 25 years old, in freezing water, 3 miles from shore. You did what you had to do to survive. Did I? Eastwood's voice was sharp now, angry. Or did I do what was easiest? What if I'd tried harder? What if I'd been strong? You'd be dead, Dave said simply. And those 2 kids would have lost both their father and the man who tried to save. Eastwood stared at, like he'd never considered that possibility. For 30 years, Dave continued, his own voice shaking, you've been punishing yourself for surviving. You've been playing these invincible characters, these men who never fail, never break, never leave anyone behind. You've been trying to become the man you think you should have been that day. And then Dave said something that would break Clint Eastwood completely. But Clint, Dave said softly, that man doesn't exist. That invincible cowboy, that perfect hero, he's a fan. Real men get scared. Real men make impossible choices. Real men survive, and then spend the rest of their lives wondering if they should have. Eastwood's face crumpled. The stoic mask shattered, and Clint Eastwood, the toughest man in Hollywood, the man who made a career out of never showing emotion, started crying. Not Hollywood crying, not performed emotion, real, ugly, 30 years of pain crying. The audience didn't know what to do. They'd never seen, nobody had ever seen. Dave stood up without thinking, walked around his desk, and instead of sitting on the floor like he'd done before, he did something different. He sat on the arm of Eastwood's chair, put his hand on the man's shoulder, just stayed there. Silent support. Paul Schaefer began to play. Softly, not a recognizable song, just gentle, supportive music. A blanket of sound for a man falling apart. Eastwood tried to compose himself, wiping his face with his hand. I'm sorry, he said, his voice rough. This isn't, I didn't mean to. Don't apologize, Dave said firmly. This is real. This matters. Eastwood looked up at, I've spent 30 years building this image, the tough guy, the man who doesn't break, and I just destroyed it in 30 seconds. No, Dave said, you spent 30 years hiding, and you just spent 30 seconds being honest. There's a difference. The audience, uncertain at first, began to applaud, slowly, then building, not celebration, recognition, respect for courage. Eastwood stood up, unsteady. Dave stood with, they faced the audience together. I don't know why I told you all that, Eastwood said, still trying to regain control. I came here to talk about a movie. You told us because you needed to, Dave said, and we needed to hear it, because every man watching this has a moment like a moment where they had to choose survival over heroism, and they've been punishing themselves ever since. Eastwood looked at the camera, at America Watch. His face was raw, exposed, completely unlike any character he'd ever played. Thomas McKinley, he said clearly. That was the pilot's name. He had a wife named Sarah and 2 daughters, Margaret and Anne, and he died because a plane engine failed, and I couldn't say. His voice steady. For 30 years, I've been too much of a coward to say his name out loud, too afraid of being judged, too afraid of not being the hero everyone thinks I am. He paused, but I'm saying it now. Thomas McKinley. He deserves to be remembered, and his family deserves to know that I tried. I failed, but I tried. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change everything. From the back of the studio, a woman stood up. She was maybe 60 years old, gray hair, wearing a simple dress. Security started moving toward her, but Dave waved them off. She walked down the aisle slowly. The audience parted. The cameras swung to follow her. She stopped right in front of Clint Eastwood. Mr. Eastwood, she said, her voice shaking. My name is McKinley. Thomas McKinley was my father. The studio gasped. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Eastwood went white. Actually white. Like all the blood had drained from his body. I'm so sorry, he whispered. God, I'm so sorry. I should have. And McKinley held up her hand, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Eastwood, I was 6 years old when my father died. My sister was 8. My mother was 30. And for 46 years, we thought he died alone in that ocean. She stepped closer. But he didn't die alone. You were there. You tried to save him. And then you swam miles in freezing water and survive. Her voice broke. Do you know what my mother said every year on the anniversary of his death? She said, I hope Tommy didn't die alone. I hope someone was with him. And now I know. Someone was. You were. Eastwood was openly sobbing now. This tower of masculinity, this icon of strength, completely broke. But I left, he said. I saved myself. You survived. And said firmly, and my mother would have wanted that. My father would have wanted that. Because you've gone on to bring joy to millions of people. You've made movies that matter. You've lived a life that counts. She reached out and took his hand. You honored my father by surviving, Mr. Eastwood. By living. By creating. Don't you see that? Eastwood shook his head, unable to speak. My mother died 5 years ago. And continued. But before she passed, she told me something. She said, if anyone ever survived that crash, I hope they lived a good life. I hope they didn't waste the chance my Tommy gave them. She squeezed his hand. You didn't waste it, Mr. Eastwood. You didn't waste. Eastwood pulled her into an embrace. They stood there, this famous movie star and this unknown woman, connected by tragedy and 30 years of misplaced guilt. The audience was devastated. Crew members were crying. Dave stood to the side, tears streaming down his face, watching something impossible unfold. Paul played softly, creating space for the moment, for the healing. When they finally separated, and McKinley looked up at Wood. Will you tell me about him? About my father? About those last moments? Eastwood nodded, unable to speak. Dave quickly arranged 3 chairs. Him, Eastwood, and Ann. They sat together, the interview forgotten, the show abandoned. For the next 20 minutes, Eastwood told and about her father, about how Thomas had tried to control the plane even as it was falling, about how he told Clint to get ready to jump, about how his last words, tell my girls I love. Eastwood hadn't remembered those words until that moment. They'd been buried under 30 years of guilt and shame, but now they came back and wept. The audience wept. America wept. He said that and whispered, tell my girls I love them. Yes, Eastwood said. That's what he said. And I'm sorry it took me 30 years to deliver the message. And shook her head. You delivered it exactly when I needed to hear it. And what happened after that night would change Clint Eastwood's entire career. NBC executives didn't know what to do with the footage. It was too raw, too real, too far from what late-night television was supposed to be. They aired it once and never again. But it changed everything. Clint Eastwood went home that night and called his children, all of them, from all his marriage, and he told them he loved them. Something he'd never done before. Not out loud, not directly. He started therapy, real therapy, dealing with survivor's guilt, with the weight of the tough guy image, with 30 years of emotional suppression, and his work changed. After 1985, Eastwood started directing more than acting, and the films he directed, Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby, Gran Torino, were all about broken men trying to find redemption, about tough guys revealing their soft side, about the cost of violence and the value of vulnerability. In Unforgiven, his character says, it's a hell of a thing, killing a man. You take away all he's got, and all he's ever gonna have. That line came from the Letterman interview, from facing Thomas McKinley's daughter, from finally admitting that strength isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. And McKinley and Clint Eastwood stayed in touch, real friends. He attended her daughter's wedding. She came to his movie premiere. They became family, bound by tragedy transformed into connect. Dave Letterman called it the most important moment in his career. That night, Dave said years later, Clint Eastwood did something braver than anything Dirty Harry ever did. He told the truth. He showed weakness. He let America see that even their toughest hero was human. He paused. And then McKinley showed us what grace looks like, what forgiveness looks like, what it means to meet someone's pain with compassion instead of judgment. In 1995, 10 years after the interview, Eastwood won the Oscar for Best Director for Unforgiven. In his acceptance speech, he thanked his family, his crew, and a pilot named Thomas McKinley, who taught me what real courage looks like. Most people didn't understand the ref, but in McKinley, watching from her living room in Seattle, did. And she cried. When Eastwood died in 2045, at age 115, he lived forever. Apparently his family found something in his personal effects. A photo of Thomas McKinley, kept in his wallet for 60 years. On the back, written in Eastwood's handwriting, I'm sorry, and thank. The legacy of that night isn't about celebrity interviews or television moment. It's about the masks men, the weight of impossible expectation, the cost of being everyone's hero when you can barely save yourself. Clint Eastwood spent 30 years trying to become the man he thought he should have been. Strong, fearless, invincible. But he was already brave, he just didn't know it. Swimming 3 miles in freezing water at 25 years old, surviving, living, creating a career that brought joy to millions. That's heroism, not the fantasy version, the real version. Dave Letterman learned something that night too. He learned that the most powerful thing television can do isn't entertain, it's witness. It's create space for truth. It's allow broken people to be honest and trust that honesty will heal rather than destroy. And America learned that maybe we need to rethink what masculinity looks. Maybe real strength isn't never crying. Maybe it's crying when you need to. Maybe it's admitting you're scared, you failed, you're human. Maybe the toughest thing a man can do is tell the truth, especially when the truth makes him look weak, especially when the truth costs him the image he's spent a lifetime building. In his final interview before his death, Eastwood was asked about his greatest regret. "Waiting 30 years to tell the truth," he said without hesitation. "And your greatest accomplishment? Finally saying Thomas McKinley's name out loud. Finally letting his daughters know he didn't die alone. Finally forgiving myself for being human." That's the story NBC buried. That's the moment that changed everything. That's the night Clint Eastwood stopped being a cowboy and started being a man. And somewhere in a cemetery in Washington State, there's a gravestone for Thomas McKinley. And every year, on the anniversary of his death, flowers appear. Anonymous. Just flowers and a note that says, "You didn't die alone, and you're not forgotten." Clint Eastwood sent those flowers for 60 years, until the day he died. And then, McKinley's children started sending, because some stories don't end. They just become part of who we are.